Welcome to another lecture in the name of the hidden Thunder Dragon bluff. Today we're going to talk about bluffs that make the opponent think that we have certain cards in our hand that we don't have in our hand, but of course we could have. This match I played on the format Library Ladder against a Chaos Turbo deck with a Chaos Control deck consists of several bluffs. Some are relatively simple bluffs, and one of them is a little more advanced, which I call the hidden Thunder Dragon bluff, which perhaps not all players know or have played. We'll mainly look at our own moves, but we'll also look at the opponent's moves from time to time without going into too much detail. We start with a relatively bad starting hand. We have two cards, a Raijiki Break and a Tribe, which require a discard, but we don't have any good discards in our hand. We have Scapegoats, but no Metamorphosis, no Creature Swap. We draw a card, which doesn't do much either, so we don't have much playability here. Of course, you could set a Scapegoat, but I would prefer to set the TT and not the Scapegoats, because we don't have any Metamorphosis or Creature Swap, and we don't have any use for activating Scapegoats. I prefer to simply set the TT, for example to stop a breaker, which is a better answer than a Scapegoat, because the breaker dies immediately, and we keep the Scapegoats until we can do something with the card. So we set the TT. The opponent has a relatively good starting hand. I also think it makes sense to play the Sangan, which he does, because he has two Raijeki breaks. Of course he wants to bring him to the graveyard quickly. Maybe he draws a Thunder Dragon or something similar. Or we attack him. He deals 1000 damage to us, which we can't really prevent. I'm not a fan of setting the Raijeki break here, because there is no card he wants to stop. If we play a breaker, he wants the Sangan to die, so he doesn't want to use the Raijeki break. Also, if we have Metamorphosis or Creature Swap, there is no use for Raijeki break either. So, we draw. And this not only the best card in the format, but also a key card in this duel, because it allows us to bluff with set cards representing muff. We play it, of course, but draw more bricks. So what could you do here? Of course, you could just attack the Sangan with the Tsukuyomi, but that's something I don't like to do, because, as you can see, he also has a Raijeki break, a Graceful, which gives him the possibility to search for a Serpent or something else if he already has the Serpent in his hand. And what's a good play here, I think, since we played a pot, he's afraid of a Moth at this point. And I think it's a good idea to set a monster here to stop the Sangan attacks or bait something out, like a Raijeki break or a Mind Control. This is already game 3, so post side, so it could be possible that he is on a Mind Control as well. And even if we do not have Moth now, we could represent Moth in order to bait out as many knocks and Mind Controls as possible, so that our Moth is still alive when we draw it. That's why I think it's pretty good to set the Tsukuyomi, but we have to protect it a bit. Of course, if he plays a Breaker or a Thunder Dragon, we don't want to let the Tsukuyomi die, so we set the ring behind. Without having the ring in my hand, I don't know if I would have set the Tsukuyomi. That would be a bit more tricky. Okay, let's see what happens next. He draws a Knight Assailant, very strong card here. He can play Graceful now. I would do the same in his position. Discards a Flip and a Knight Assailant, definitely standard. Now he's really falling for the bait. After discarding the Thunder Dragon, he actually plays Raijeki Break, just like we planned. I don't think it's a good play from him. I would probably just drop the BLS in his shoes. Because he has a lot of monsters in his hand, he would keep the Raijeki Break, and if we can somehow out the BLS, he has the possibility to answer Snatch with Raijeki Break, or he has another Chaos Sorcerer, which is also still alive, to be able to out cards like Ter. So I would have dropped the BLS here, in defense, and then attacked with Sangan, and in main phase 2, Sangan could then tributed for a set Thunder Dragon, so that he can search for the Serpent, leaving the Raijeki Break set. This way, he would have protection from OTKs with cards like Snatch, not having the attack position Sangan, but instead having a set Thunder Dragon and a set Raijeki Break to protect. In general, if you have a good hand like he has here with his Chaos, and we have neither light nor dark in the grave, I think it's a good idea not to slow play such things, and just continue on the card advantage, not to wait for an OTK with your Chaos monsters, but instead just restrict our play. In situations where I would wait for an OTK, it would be a situation where you're at a huge card disadvantage, and the OTK is the only win condition that is left. So, if he didn't have the graceful resolve here, and not that advantage, then I would try to go for an OTK, but here I would just drop the BLS for additional card advantage. Also, banishing our monster is much better than destroying it, because it could be Sangan or just a dark, and we have neither light nor dark in the grave. But he decides to Reijiki break the set instead, and we now have the first dark monster in the graveyard. His play follows with an attack and a set monster, and together with another set Reijiki break. And I don't think he is now in such a great situation. He has 2 chaos monsters, but only 1 trap card to protect them, so not much protection. He now has underprotected chaos monsters, which he doesn't really want to drop because he's playing against Snatch, etc. Okay, I admit I've talked too much about him. Let's focus on our own play now. So what can we do here now? We drew Nobleman for turn, which we can activate, and we do this, of course. Now, it's getting interesting again. So we could somehow attack Sangan with the tribe, but that's also relatively bad, because he already has Chaos a life, and the tribe is very vulnerable if he decides to search for a Tsukuyomi that he could also already have. Or he could also search for Muff. We don't want all of that, of course. That's why we'll continue with bluffing here. As we've already seen, he does not have Nobleman, and he already wasted a Reijeki break on our monster. That's why it's a pretty good play to simply set the tribe here again. First of all, Sangan can't get over it, and if he plays a Thunder Dragon, we can also out him with the ring, and we'll just try to bait a mind control or something like that from him, and otherwise just defend ourselves from direct attacks. We don't have much better alternatives either. Just letting the Sangan through all the time is stupid, because we'll be dead at some point. And as I said, we shouldn't summon a tribe to attack here. That's why we keep bluffing and see if we can bait him. And he's actually going for it again. Generally speaking, if we've already set the Tsukuyomi here in turn 2, we are telling a really believable story here that we are holding a Muff in our hand. Why else should we have set the Tsukuyomi? Most likely because we had Muff in hand and decided to set Tsukuyomi before. So we're really representing a Muff, which we actually did not have. We are just playing with his beliefs. And out of nowhere, it makes really sense to me why the card is named Magician of Faith. That's why this is a good bluff, in my opinion. But let's continue with the duel now. Now he attacks again with the Sangan. We can't really do anything. Let's see how it goes. Now he sets the Tsukuyomi here. We're pretty worried about his Muff here as well, because he's already set the Dekoichi as possible knockbait, and he has a Graceful in the graveyard. That's why we go for the Reijeki break here to get rid of the set monster card, because we're too concerned of his Muff. We could have summoned Serpent and TT here too, but we decide to not do this line because we don't want to trigger the Sangan. Why should we out him off with TT here just to let him search another Muff with the Sangan? That doesn't make sense, right? Unfortunately, he now draws Duo for turn. Of course, this is a very, very bad situation for us now. We're losing both of our cards in hand. We actually kept the Solemn in hand here because we planned to activate the Storm at some later point, so we don't want to build our own back row that much. Now he continues attacking with the Sangan. Unfortunately, we can't do much. Now he sets them off, and we now depend on top decks because we're already in a very bad spot at this point. Fortunately, the meta top deck can out them off. That's very good now, and let's see how it goes. He draws a brick, which I might have not sided in his shoes. This is game 3 and I was going first. Control is generally not such a deck, which Trap Dust Shoot is so good against because we don't play that high monster count. Also, we play Solemn to set our back row completely to play around Shoot, and the card is pretty often dead, like now, for example. But anyway, he plays the Chaos Sorcerer now. We've a face-down TT here, which you could activate now, but we don't want to trigger the Sangan yet, because he still has his normal summon. If he gets the Sangan search now, he can get a Muff right away. And we just don't have an out against the Muff. So he'd rather let him keep Sangan on the field instead of setting a Muff, which we can't out. That's why we'll do nothing here now. Maybe he'll set another monster, Then we can summon a serpent in our turn and fire our TT. That would be much more lucrative, of course. He attacks now. That's obviously a bit annoying. We still have the ring here, so if we get down to 3,000 life points, that's a critical zone where we can't activate the ring, on a BLS, for example. That's why we decide to activate the goats here, although that's a bit annoying as well because we have a TT here, which we might want to activate soon, but unfortunately we have to goats now. He attacks one goat, sets his dead shoot, and passes. Okay, we'll take the serpent, activate the upstart, and draw the thunder dragon. And here comes the key moment in this whole duel. Inexperienced or frustrated players would probably discard the thunder dragon, search the 2 additional copies, possibly set the shitty serpent, don't think too much and don't find alternative plays. Maybe if they think they are smart, they discard the second thunder dragon to dodge the trap dust shoot, even if it's unlikely that he actually has it. Many don't see other alternatives here. We do. And this is the hidden thunder dragon bluff. We decide at this point to think about the thunder dragon a bit more, not discarding it, and instead set the serpent. And that has the following background. If we keep the thunder dragon in hand and set the serpent, our opponent doesn't know that it's a serpent because the serpent could just be in our hand. If we discard the thunder dragon, he knows immediately where the serpent is. So setting the serpent and discarding thunder dragon doesn't help much because he could just kill 2 tokens and letting my serpent stay set. But if he doesn't know that we set a serpent, then what does that do for us? Well, we can stall a bit better because since he doesn't know that it's the serpent set, he'll at least attack it with the Sangan in case he can't out a set monster. Then he banishes only 1 token, which means we have 1 more token to stall. If he knows it's the serpent, we'll instead lose 2 tokens. So by revealing my serpent, we'll lose 1 more token. That's the most likely and obvious benefit of making this hold, but it has further side effects, namely the baiting aspect. He already has 2 Raijeki breaks in the graveyard, but it could be reasonable that he sided in a 3rd Raijeki break against control. He probably doesn't have a knock because he didn't knock our other monsters. He could also have a mind control, which would be pretty good for us because he would take over the set monster. Then he'll probably flip it to banish so we can use our TT in response, and we get great value out of TT. And of course there's the BLS, which he can have. We can try to bait it, which would be great. And indeed, this is what happened. That's why I think this is a very good plan, to keep the TD hidden in our hand, and then try to bait out more stuff with Serpent. Even in the worst case, he'll attack the Serpent, and we'll have 1 more token. This Thunder Dragon holding is generally something you should always keep in mind if you're going to draw a Thunder Dragon. It's not always clear that you should discard it, because especially if you're setting cards in the same turn, you want to make the opponent think that we have top-decked something strong here. In our case, a muff, which he was really afraid of it. And we've already seen this. He's a very paranoid player. It was a believable story again that we have top-decked a Moth here while having Pot in the grave. We've been thinking for a while whether to discard TD or not. And also because of the timing, it could have made sense that we were actually thinking whether to set the Serpent or the Moth. So the fact that we took a bit more time here made him even more afraid of the set. Another thing that I wanted to mention here is that we even sided out 1 Moth in Game 3. So actually, it's quite unlikely that we've top-decked it now. He doesn't know that, of course. Siding out one of the Moths can be a sneaky side deck plan. If a Moth gets knocked, the opponent will often remain paranoid, thinking we still have a second Moth in our hand. Additionally, Moth is often not that great anyway, because it's just a brick in the starting hand. Control already has enough bricks and doesn't need any more. You often play against mind controls, where the Moth is just bad. Especially if the opponent knows the hand, with something like Trap Dust Shoot, then the Moth becomes very vulnerable. In general, it's just not such a great card post side, and that's why it makes sense to simply side 1 out. Okay, enough said. It goes on now. Our opponent falls on our hidden Thunder Dragon bluff. He doesn't know that we have him on hand. He thinks we might have the Serpent on hand. If he knew we had the set Serpent, he would obviously never drop a BLS here. That would indeed be completely idiotic. We can now use our TT super effectively. He gets the Sangan search, but it's definitely worth it now. Of course, he searches for his own moth and sets it. We get back the serpent. We even avoid the trap dust shoot. We can't prevent the moth now. We have to take it into account, but it's not that bad. He just goes +1 with the grace. We now can win this game thanks to our bluff. He draws into 3 spies. Very annoying. We will top deck a few cards. Let's review that very quickly. See what's happening here. We top deck a swap. He goes on with a breaker. We still have the ring. We win the game. As you can see now, I only had 1 moth in my deck. We top deck the BLS, and that's it. So that was the hidden Thunder Dragon bluff. I hope you learned something. You can now try to use it in certain situations. What's also important, if the opponent doesn't know the bluff, which is very common, you can get a lot of information from it. Just keep in mind, whenever the opponent discards a Thunder Dragon, you can derive that the remaining cards he plays now can't be top-decked this turn. So if he tries to represent a Mirror Force or a Moaf, he basically implies that those threats were in his hand already. But in many situations, this can also be ruled out. Sometimes you know the opponent's hand already, or sometimes you can rule out certain cards in the opponent's hand because if he had those before, he would already use them in earlier turns. And this is also something you can derive information from. These are things you should pay attention to. Ask yourself, how realistic is it for the opponent to top deck something in his turn? That's it with the lecture. See you next time.